A Russian military aircraft just landed in Beirut. Not a commercial flight, not a chartered cargo run. A plane dispatched by Vladimir Putin himself, carrying 27 tons of aid, touching down at an airport within range of Israel's northern border. Washington didn't see it coming. Jerusalem couldn't stop it. And what happened next tells us something profound about where power in the Middle East is actually headed. If you follow this channel because you want analysis that goes deeper than the headlines, the kind grounded in history and constitutional thinking, in plain honest observation, then subscribe. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. New York, London, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, wherever you are, I want to hear from you. This conversation matters, and you being part of it makes it richer. Now, let's get into it. The aircraft was an Ilyushin Il-76, operated by Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations. Its cargo, mobile generators, non-perishable food, tents, blankets, basic survival materials. Russia maintains no weapons were aboard. Western governments have suggested otherwise, that arms destined for Iranian-backed forces may have been hidden among the humanitarian goods. That accusation as of this writing remains unproven. It may yet be substantiated, but what cannot be disputed is what happened on the ground. The plane landed, the supplies came off, and no one stopped it. That requires some context to fully appreciate. Since Israel escalated its ground operations in southern Lebanon on the 2nd of March, the human cost has been staggering. United Nations agencies operating in the field have confirmed more than 2,200 dead and over 7,500 wounded. And anyone who has studied modern conflict understands those figures are almost certainly an undercount. The actual toll climbs higher than what survives the bureaucratic process of official verification. Israel's approach throughout this period is one I can only describe as the deliberate instrumentalization of deprivation. The targeting of electricity, food supply chains, medicine, basic infrastructure, not as incidental damage, but as strategic tools. Lebanon has been subjected to the same logic applied in Gaza. Make daily existence so stripped of essentials that civilian populations either submit or disappear quietly, away from cameras and accountability. That strategy has had the open accommodation of Washington, and that accommodation, I will say directly, represents one of the most serious moral failures in American foreign policy during my lifetime. Into that vacuum, Russia moved. The Il-76 departed the Ramenskoye Air Base outside Moscow. Within 24 hours of Putin signing the order, it was on the ground in Beirut. There is a logistical footnote to this story that deserves more attention than it has received. On the return flight to Moscow, that same aircraft carried Russian nationals, citizens and their families, who had been stranded in Lebanon since the fighting intensified. Aid delivered on the outbound leg. Evacuees recovered on the way home. Purposeful, integrated, efficient, the operational signature of a government that has decided what it wants and organized itself to achieve it. Now compare that to what the Gulf Arab states did. Countries of immense wealth, with aircraft and stockpiles and proximity to Lebanon, countries that could have moved far more than 27 tons without straining a budget line. They issued statements. The European Union, which speaks at length about humanitarian principles and international law, also issued statements. Russia sent a plane. Edmund Burke, a thinker I have returned to throughout my career, understood something essential about how credibility works in statecraft. It is not built through what governments say. It is built through what they do when the moment demands action. By that measure, the ledger here is unambiguous. Which brings me to something I find both revealing and deeply disturbing, the role of Jared Kushner in this so-called mediation effort. I use that phrase with deliberate skepticism. The word mediation carries a specific meaning. It implies impartiality, the absence of conflicting loyalties, a degree of trust from all parties at the table. By every one of those criteria, Kushner's involvement fails the test. What the public record shows, and I am drawing here from American publications, the New York Times, Politico, the Washington Post, is a relationship between the Kushner family and Benjamin Netanyahu spanning decades. Personal, ideological, financial. There are accounts, corroborated across multiple outlets, that Kushner gave Netanyahu his own bed in his New Jersey home during a visit, relocating himself to the basement so the Israeli Prime Minister could sleep more comfortably. I raise this not for its biographical color, but for what it reveals about the nature of this relationship. A man with that kind of intimacy with one party to a conflict cannot function as a neutral arbiter of that conflict. The pretense of doing so is not diplomacy, it is theater. The theater becomes more troubling still. Congress has opened an investigation into whether Kushner was simultaneously pursuing billions of dollars in private investment in the region while acting as Trump's personal envoy. These remain allegations unproven at this stage, but if they hold up, what they describe is not a conflict of interest in the conventional bureaucratic sense. They describe the corruption of the diplomatic function itself, a peace process managed by someone whose primary motivations appear to be financial and personal rather than strategic or constitutional. The American public has not received the accounting on this that it deserves. Step back now and consider the larger pattern. Russia is not expanding its influence in Lebanon, Iraq, Oman, and across the region because it has surpassed American power. It is expanding because the United States has progressively abandoned the moral and diplomatic authority that genuine leadership requires. The mechanism matters. You cannot sustain global credibility while simultaneously enabling the starvation of civilian populations and presenting a personally compromised envoy as the face of your peace efforts. I have watched a version of this logic at work in Cuba for more than 6 decades. The blockade imposed on that island has been justified on the grounds that it applies pressure to an authoritarian government. In practice, the pressure has landed almost entirely on ordinary Cubans, people with no meaningful power over the ideology of their state, just as ordinary Americans have no meaningful power over every decision made in their name. When Russia delivered fuel to Cuba in defiance of American prohibitions, and when Russia's counterparts in China did the same, their message was simple. We do not recognize Washington's authority to dictate who receives electricity. The lights came back on in parts of the island. The authoritarian government remains. I want to be direct about something, because this argument leads somewhere uncomfortable, and I believe in addressing discomfort honestly, rather than talking around it. Suggesting that Russia has positioned itself on the more defensible side of the humanitarian question in Lebanon will unsettle many people, including in some measure me. Russia is not a democracy. I have condemned its invasion of Ukraine, and I continue to. Vladimir Putin is not a figure I admire. These are not caveats I offer grudgingly. They are convictions. But geopolitical actors do not need to be admirable to be correct on any specific question. Russia's motivations in Lebanon are almost certainly self-interested, expanding regional presence, demonstrating relevance, embarrassing the United States, probably all three at once. The humanitarian effect, however, is what it is, independent of the motivations behind it. 27 tons of generators and food reached people who needed them. That is a fact. Facts do not dissolve when the actor delivering them is impure. What this moment truly illuminates is the condition of American credibility. I have spent my career arguing that the United States represents something historically significant, a constitutional republic built on the premise that human beings can govern themselves, that rights precede the state, that power must be constrained by law. I hold those convictions still, but a nation that claims those values while tolerating the deliberate destruction of civilian infrastructure as a geopolitical instrument is engaged in a contradiction so severe it hollows out the moral authority those values are supposed to generate. The founders understood this dynamic. Washington warned against passionate attachments to foreign nations that warp judgment and distort interests. Adams grasped that republics survive not on military strength alone, but on the civic virtue of their people. When I look at the United States today, funding a conflict that has produced thousands of dead in Lebanon and tens of thousands more in Gaza, blocking humanitarian relief, and dispatching a personally entangled envoy as the symbol of its engagement, I do not recognize the republic those men constructed. I see something that has traveled a considerable distance from its own foundations. Russia sent a plane, the generators were unloaded, somewhere in Lebanon lights came on. Meanwhile, the United States and its European partners were, by all observable evidence, still working on their statements of concern. The question of who defends human dignity in the world is not answered by what a government calls itself. It is not answered by which economic system it formally endorses or which values it claims to represent. It is answered by what governments actually do in specific moments under real pressure when the cost of action is tangible. in Lebanon in this season by that measure, the answer is one that should challenge everyone who has spent their life arguing for the superiority of the Western democratic model. It challenged me. That is precisely why I am saying it. The path back from that challenge begins where it always has, in a republic, with citizens willing to think without flinching, speak without euphemism, and hold their government to an honest accounting. That is what I have attempted to do for more than 4 decades of public life. If you watched this far, you already understand why this kind of analysis matters, and why so little of it makes it into mainstream coverage. Share this video, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what this conversation stirred in you. Subscribe if this channel is giving you something worth returning to. The dialogue this moment demands doesn't stop here, it continues with you.